chief in Sioux City, Iowa, now estimates 195 people died when a United Airlines DC-10 attempted an emergency landing there. That would mean as many as 125 people survived. It would also mean, if memory serves me, this is the second worst domestic single-plane air crash in history. The plane hit about a half mile from the runway. It bounced twice, landed upside down, and burst into flames, as you just saw.
I'm Gary Dean, and Talia Lynch has been so kind to do a video for me. And this is my story of being in a plane crash. It'll be 29 years this July 19th, so almost 30 years. And I think a lot has been kept in my mind, but probably a lot has been erased, so to speak. And just going to kind of give some of the events. So it started out as a really nice day, July weather, and taking my first business trip from Denver to Chicago. The plane I was on was a DC-10, which I'll talk about that later, but not the most reliable in my opinion. Some things were overlooked, and unfortunately a lot of people, lost their lives and were hurt, all that type of stuff. So I took off from Denver. It was actually Stapleton Airport, shows you the age, and I was on a nonstop flight from Denver to Chicago, and we were at cruising altitude. We just had lunch, and all of a sudden a large boom just echoed all over the fuselage, and lo and behold, the engine just above on the tail section had a titanium disc that was fractured, and it shattered all the hydraulic lines. So we were rendered helpless for the most part for controlling, I should say the pilots were rendered helpless for controlling the plane. So it was scary, quick, just like shock, and once the plane stabilized after what seemed like maybe hours, which was probably just minutes, my gut feeling was we're okay. We haven't done anything really horrible. So Al Haynes, who was the pilot, Bill Records, who was the co-pilot, and Dudley Dvorak was the flight engineer. And there's an unsung hero. Give me a minute. His name is Denny Fitch, and he was just amazing. He was in first class. He went up to the cabin and he said, "Hey, how can I help?" So he was a tremendous help to those guys, and between the four of them, they did no one has done a simulation to land the plane like they did. So it was just luck. I'll just put it that way, and I would say Al Haynes would call it luck as well. But with luck, there's talent and skill and all that. So we were able to maintain. Pilots were able to maintain. I felt like I was up there in spirit, but obviously they did the job. And the plane stabilized. We did what they called fugoiding, which is like a dolphin, in and out of the water. So we were kind of going up and down, but in this large spiraling down circle. So we were just over Sioux City, Iowa, and there was an Air Corps base, National Air Guard, something like that. Anyway, that was the destination that they piloted in. But in between all this, right after the disc had blown, retract a little bit, Al Haynes was on the intercom immediately and saying, we've had an explosion, here's what's going on. But he was an excellent communicator. He kept, I think, everybody at ease, which was huge. And Bill Records and Dudley Dvorak, the flight engineer, co-pilot, they came back. I was sitting, I believe, in almost the very last window seat on the port left-hand side of the plane, next to a lady. The two of us were seated next to each other, and then the DC-10 had, I think, probably I don't know, 7 seats in between and then 2 or 1 seat. So I believe it was like 9 or 10 passengers per row. And once they came back to look, they kind of see if they could look through one of the windows just to see what had happened. Kind of looked around, everybody was pretty quiet. They went back, and then Al came back on and, just said, "Hey, we've lost an engine." And then the 4 of them had to contact United, I'm sure in Chicago, and go through all the technical procedures. What do we do? How do we go about this? Well, they started thinking there would be a way, but no one had an answer. It was just like, yeah, we don't have that written in a manual or anything. So again, talk about duress and impromptu learning. That pretty much stated it all. So we were, I think, we were at cruising altitude, probably around somewhere around 30,000 feet. So by the time we did this spiraling effect and we're coming to our destination in Sioux City, the unsung hero, Denny Fitch, he was right between Al Haynes, the pilot, and Bill Records, the co-pilot. So he was working cables, things to help flaps, ailerons, things like that. So we had a chance, is the ultimate word. And once they kind of got things stable, again, Al Haynes would come on, multiple times throughout that close to hour point where we're going to come down to land. So the atypical thing where, we're coming in and it's like brace, 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 get ready, everybody practice, get your position. And so we all did that. And once we were able to get through that practice procedure, all the stewardesses, airline attendants, if you will, pretty much, got in their jump seats and situated, and we almost made it. The plane landed, but it caught just, I believe, was the left port wing, and then that's what created the tumble and separated everything. So I was, in my position, I was hurled right out of the plane, and all I remember is seeing, a large gust of rush of wind, and obviously the sound of crashing, and then green. So I was thrown into a cornfield, which was obviously saved my life. And that's all I remember.
It was a regular work day, and I took Gary out to the airport to go to a trade show in Chicago. It was the first time he'd gone off by himself, because usually we travel together. So anyway, I dropped him off in the front of the airport and went back to work. A couple hours later, Donna called me, my wife, and said, "What flight is Gary on?" And I said, "Flight 232, United." And she says, "Oh my God, it's crashed." So she said, "You wait there and I'll be down to pick you up." So she came down to the shop and picked me up, came home. I saw on the television the flight coming in, I saw the crash. And I didn't see how anybody could possibly survive that. So I might say this was the worst day of my life. So anyway, about an hour later, I kept trying to call United to get any information I could, and all their phone lines were jammed, and I couldn't get through to anybody. So after it must have been an hour and a half, something like that, a lady called us. She was a nurse from a hospital in Sioux City, and she said, "Your son is alive." And so anyway, she gave us some of the particulars, and she said, "Would you like to talk to him?" I said, "Of course." So anyway, we talked to Gary for briefly, and then he said he was okay and everything was going to be all right. And I talked to this doctor that was a retired orthopedics surgeon, and he said, your son has compound fracture and his right foot is detached. He said, I'm going to try to put it back on. He said he's young, he's healthy, he doesn't smoke, and he said, I'll do everything I can to fix him. So anyway, then I was euphoric. So I went from the worst day to the best day. And I hung up. And then I realized I didn't know what hospital he was in. So I tried calling back, and I can't remember how we did connect, but I still couldn't get through to anybody. So I told Donna, I said, get Cindy. Gary had just got married shortly before this, and we'll drive there. So we got in the car, we drove all night, and we got to Sioux City about, 6:30 in the morning. I get a little emotional telling this. Anyway, we stopped at a service station, and I asked where this trauma hospital was, and the guy standing there says, follow me. So we went out, and he got in his truck, and he led us right up to the hospital. And I might say the people in Sioux City were so good through this whole thing. So we got to the hospital, and before we went, I called my brother. He lived in Omaha, and he and his wife went up and were there shortly after Gary got in the hospital. So we got there. Jan, my sister-in-law, says, now Gary is alive. And she said, he looks bad. And so anyway, we got in to see him, and he looked like somebody taking a ball bat and just beat his head to pieces. His forehead was pooched out. His eyes were black. I mean, but he was alive. That was the big thing. So anyway, they operated on him again that day. I believe they operated on him the day of the accident, on his leg and on his ankle. And then they operated on him again, I think, for his wrist and his arm. Anyway, he was in casts, and he was getting better. So anyway, his sisters, Julie was in New York City. Tricia was in Vancouver, British Columbia. Dodie and Lori were in Santa Fe, where they live. And within the next day, they were all there, which really helped. And so anyway, we were all in Gary's bedroom in the evening, and this was the second day. He'd been operated on several times the day before and that day, but he was now alert. We were calling Chuck and Alma to tell them that Gary could talk to him, that he was okay. And while he was talking to him, here come the doctor and a couple of orderlies. They said, we got to have Gary right now. And we hung up the phone. They didn't explain anything. They just took Gary's bed and wheeled him out. So I followed them. We got downstairs, and they said, Gary pleuris, which is the lining around your lungs, is ruptured, and he's drowning. So they said, we have to operate on him immediately. So this is like the third, maybe the fourth time he's been operated on in a little over 24 hours. So they operated on him, and it was like they plugged a 3/8-inch hose in each side of his chest. And then they put him upstairs, and I spent the night with him. And that was a very bad night. We played word games and number games, and I just needed to keep him awake because they couldn't give him any more painkillers because they'd given him so much already. So I don't know, somewhere around 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning, I was just beat. So I called over to the hotel where we were staying across from the hospital, and Cindy and Donna came over, and Cindy, I think, saved Gary's life that day. She just stayed on his bedside and talked to him and talked to him and talked to him. And Gary's nurse, Swanson, who he's talked about, was so great. And then there was a nurse from another city, and I can't think of it. Anyway, she was like an EMT nurse, that went on planes, to rescue people. So anyway, we got through that day, and then he started coming around, and he was better. So I went out to the airport and to get his luggage to identify it. And what a powerful scene that was. Here's this huge hangar with just luggage all over the place. I was able to locate Gary's and his briefcase. I think that's probably all I got was his briefcase. And anyway, like I say, it was the worst of times, the best of times. And then if I'd been there for, 3 or 4 days, and he was recovering, so they said he would be in the hospital a while longer. He was kind of following the co-pilot. His name escapes me right now. Bill Records. They seem to be in rooms next to each other, in the operating room, the recovery room, all around the hospital. So we got to know his wife fairly well, and it was a close time. We did meet some of the people that had very badly injured children and relatives, and so then after 4 days or 5 days, whatever it was, Gary seemed to be on the mend. So we left and came home, except for Donna stayed with him and Cindy stayed there. And then, 17 days? Something like that. So then Donna flew home, and then Cindy and Gary came home on a Learjet from a hospital plane that they flew out of San Diego. Every day they'd fly from San Diego to Sioux City and take people back all over the United States. And that plane was so fast, I took my CAD cam up. I was going to record him flying and landing. And I was standing there, and it came in so fast, it just zoomed, and it was there, and then all of a sudden it was in front of us, and I didn't get any of it. But anyway, then Gary came home, and Donna had kind of turned our living room into a hospital room. We got a hospital bed for Gary to be in, and Donna took care of him from then on. We had a visiting nurse that came. I don't know if she came every day, but she came quite often. And from then on, it was recovery. And so that was July, and Gary didn't go back to work till the next March. And it's been nothing but good since.
The next day or two, I woke up in a hospital and knew what had happened. And I, just looked up. I was like, okay, I'm in a hospital. Yeah, I remember the crash, all that. And then there was a nurse, and I believe her name was Kay. And she was a Flight for Life nurse from Sioux Falls, South Dakota. So in that tri-state area between Nebraska, Iowa, and South Dakota, there was all these first responders. And to back up a little, the town, the city of Sioux City had gone through this emergency preparedness drill, and which was really unheard of back then. And I think the gentleman who requested that, or got it staged, I think everybody was like, "What is he thinking? What's this all about?" But had it not been for his insight, I don't think I'd be sitting here right now. And I believe some of the first people who were severely injured, myself included, were airlifted within, I think it was within a 10-minute period. I mean, it was really fast. But again, everybody was waiting. Fire engines, ambulances, copters, everything. So there were 2 hospitals. One was Marion, that's the one that I was sent to. That's more of an orthopedic hospital. And then the other one was St. Luke's, which was like a burn victim type hospital. So that's where I was sent. And again, don't remember any of this, but my wife Cindy, my mom, my dad, all 3 of them. I spoke to them just after all this had happened, so that was a big relief for my family. But again, don't remember any of that. And then they got my mom's newly purchased Honda Civic, and they drove from Denver to Sioux City nonstop. And I just remember the story. My dad pulls up to a gas station and talks to one of the attendants and said, I'm here, my son was in the crash, and I need to find out where Marion Hospital is. And atypical Midwest mentality is like, follow me, sir. So pretty cool. And took him there. So that was, just community support at its best. So from that, I do remember waking up from multiple surgeries and such, but my right ankle, fortunate to have that. It was a really bad compound fracture, and then my left ankle was a dislocation. Dr. Paulsrud was my orthopedic surgeon, and interesting man, very talented, but he was a MASH doctor in the Vietnam War, and obviously knows how to do things on the fly and get things back together best he can. And I just remember him telling me that the thing that affected him the most was just smelling the jet fuel, because that brought back a lot of bad things that he had experienced in Vietnam. So everybody, like it or not, you have those triggers, and that was one of them for him. But at any rate, he put my elbow, my ankle, did all the things he was trained and did well. But my right ankle, like I say, was a pretty bad compound fracture, and he just put it in layman's terms and said, you've got about 100,000 miles on that joint, and that crash used about 75,000 of them. So, but amazingly enough, he did a superb job. And 2 years ago, in 2016, May 4th, I had a total ankle replacement by an orthopedic surgeon, Dr. Starling, and she was great. But she actually worked for GE as a mechanical engineer on O-rings and fluids and things, so she knew of that crash. So small world, how things kind of come full circle. But like I say, I've got a replacement ankle, and I'm really fortunate to have that, and we'll see how it goes in the next 12 to 14 years. All my ribs, left and right hand side, were cracked, and what happened there was your lungs have a pleura sac lining, like a absorption type thing. Well, the ribs punctured through that and then punctured into my lungs, so I had blood filling up in both lungs, but they didn't realize it at the time. Before I get into that, I had a screw in my right elbow, fractured my wrist, and broke my, I believe, scapula, and pretty good head trauma, all that. So fortunate to be around. But again, the corn and all the rain they had the night prior was, essential for me getting through all this. So back to the lungs and the cracked ribs. So I do remember being on a gurney, just kind of like what you seeing the movies, looking up, and the doctor was, kind of overlooking me, and my wife Cindy was next to me, and I just remember I was on some pretty good drugs, let's put it that way, Dilaudid, which is probably as good as better than morphine, and I just told her, it's like, yeah, you should just come up here on the gurney with me and, snuggle with me. So, and then I remember seeing the doctor, and I don't know if his last name was Johnson, but I'll use that, and he's like, Gary, you've got some internal bleeding, we're going to have to, I could care less at that point, but I, being the smart aleck I am, I said, Johnson, your name's and removing spleen's your game. So he probably grimaced at that, but I didn't think much about it. So from that, that's when they went in and they've had to put in 2 tubes in each lung to drain fluid, so I could get that off and get better. But that was probably a pretty critical point as well, because again, Cindy and my mom, I think they were pretty stressed out, and then my dad, being who he is, got me through that night, and I'm sure it was pretty much a touch and go thing. So I don't remember it, but just him being there, obviously, I think pulled me through. So that was a good thing. So during my stay, I had a great nurse. Her name is Lori Swanson, and she lived right on the border of Nebraska to Iowa, I believe, and she was just great. She was like one of my sisters, and became very fond of her. She, daily, almost daily for weeks on end, she was my lead nurse, and just really special and caring and very accommodating. So I can't thank her enough, and it's pretty cool because we still keep in touch, not too often, but I don't do Facebook, but I send her a text every so often, and it's just great to see her smiling face, and very positive, good person. So I have a lot to thank for her services. And then back to the orthopedic ward. So Bell Records, the co-pilot, and Denny Fitch, and then Dudley Dvorak, all 3 were on my ward. Al Haynes, the pilot, actually just had some minor, scrapes and bruises, and no broken bones. So amazingly enough, he escaped a lot of those. But Denny Fitch had some pretty serious orthopedic things, I think, with his hip or pelvis, and probably back. And then Bell Records, his back, I think, was pretty badly beat up. My mom one night, she was just hanging out, and so she talked to both Bell Records and Denny Fitch, who were in there, and Dudley Dvorak, not to discount him, but I think he broke his ankle, but wasn't in it for the duration like we were. So it was really nice to, for me to visit with the actual pilots one-on-one, just like we're doing here, and had some really good, insightful talks. And I would say for Denny Fitch, he just was extremely special to me. And the night I got a visit with him, it was probably for better than an hour. And, he told of his, belief in God and spirit, everything he believed in, and, that was encouraging. And, how people get through traumatic times, and whether you believe that or not, but it certainly helped me. And unfortunately, Denny passed away some years ago. Probably it's maybe been 8 or 10 years ago. I think he had a brain tumor or some type of cancer, so that was pretty upsetting to hear he'd gone. But I believe Al Haynes is still alive. He's Superman. He's probably close to 90 now, or somewhere in there. And then Bell Records, I unfortunately kind of lost touch with him, but I believe he's probably still around as well. I haven't heard anything from that, but all in all, just good to have that support. And I want to back up to my aunt and uncle that lived in Omaha, Nebraska, my Uncle Walt and Aunt Jan, who unfortunately have both passed away, but they were, the first family members to see me in the hospital. And my Uncle Walt, good sense of humor, always smiling, laughing, but I don't remember him or my Aunt Jan walking in the room or anything, but my Uncle Walt's like, Gary, it looked like you were, beat to a pulp, like my dad said, but he said, you look like a Neanderthal man with my forehead sticking out. So I got a pretty good laugh out of that, but, he's just a great guy. And, for my two cousins, Julie and Katie, it's pretty cool. And I'm, Katie and Jeremy, or Katie's husband, Jeremy, they're proud owner of a little baby girl named Valerie, and I'm the godfather, so I'm pretty proud of that. So that's a good legacy to have. So one day we'll show her this. And, she can have some kind of insight of her grandma and grandpa were. So anyway, so once I got through all those surgeries and what have you, so from July 19th, I think probably towards the end of July, I'd pretty well been through all that. And then towards the beginning of August, had pretty much everything patched up, with the exception of my tubes that were my lungs each. So I'd have those removed, and then I had to wait, I think, about a day or two just to make sure things were sealed, because I was going to get back on the airplane, not that one, but on an ambulance jet, which actually was probably one of the better things I could have done, and flew home. But before all that happened, retracting a little bit, the woman sitting next to me unfortunately didn't make it, and neither did quite a few other people around me. So that certainly, to this day, is a tough one for me to comprehend, but I'm very fortunate to be here sitting as I am right now. So we, Cindy, myself, my mom was still around. She flew back solo, which I didn't like so much. I wanted her to be with us, but she assured me everything was going to be all right, which moms do, and she made it back. So Cindy and I and a nurse and then the pilot, co-pilot of this Lear ambulance jet, flew from Sioux City to Jeffco Airport in just about, I think it was right at an hour. So that was a quick ride home, and it was pretty cool because when my parents picked us up at the airport, got us in the car, and I had to come back to my parents' house where I'm sitting now, and didn't realize it, but they had done a really nice job and had a nice surprise welcome home thing for me, and that was very heartwarming and touching, and just shows you who your friends and family are. So that can't say enough about that. So so all those things that went through, just from start to finish, wouldn't recommend it for anybody, but having experienced it and being around the people I have for my family and friends, that's really what pulled me through. And that's pretty much my story.